everybody, friends, partners, and supporters. My name is Javier Juarez, and I serve as the Senior Director of Advancement at MIRA. I'll be your facilitator for this informational panel titled Beyond the Vineyard, a Humanitarian Response for All Migrants. And joining me today, we have Liz Sweet, MIRA's Executive Director, Sarang Sakabat, Political Director, and Amy Grunder, Director of State Policy and Legislative Affairs. Over the next hour or so, we'll share some information about the current migrant trends happening in our states, as well as ways that policymakers can support newly arrived migrants in the Commonwealth. We will save the last part of this panel to answer any questions that you may have. So please use the Q&A feature on this webinar so we can get your questions going. And while Liz goes on, I'm going to figure out the chat. So Liz, please take it away.
Thank you, Javier, and welcome. It's wonderful to see so many of you with us today. We're very much looking forward to this conversation. I do want to just begin today by acknowledging that today is a high holy day for our Jewish friends and partners. It is Yom Kippur, which is a day of atonement. And in that spirit, I want to ask for forgiveness for scheduling on this holiday. As Javier mentioned, we are recording this session to share this briefing with anyone who is not able to be present with us today for this event. So with that, we are going to go ahead and get started. And I'm just sharing my screen and a few slides to kick us off with our agenda for today. So we will begin this conversation by speaking a little bit about the arrivals that came to Martha's Vineyard a couple of weeks ago, and then want to expand the lens a little bit to talk about new arrivals in Massachusetts and the needs of those various populations. And then we'll end by talking about some of MIRA's advocacy and then allowing a time for questions and answers. So many of us know that on September 14th, 48 migrants from Venezuela were flown on private planes to Martha's Vineyard. They were made false promises around what they would find upon arriving in Martha's Vineyard. And importantly, all of these 48 individuals had entered the United States at the border seeking asylum. They were seeking protection here in this country, as is their right under international law and under our laws here in the United States. Sometimes this situation receives less attention in the US media, but there is a significant refugee crisis in South America. Children, women, and men continue to leave Venezuela to escape violence, insecurity, and threats, as well as lack of many basic and essential services. There are currently more than 6 million Venezuelan refugees and migrants worldwide. The majority of them are in countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, but there are some individuals who have come to the United States, including here in Massachusetts, seeking protection. And interestingly, it's actually the second largest refugee displacement around the world. So just wanted to share a little bit of that context for these individuals from Venezuela. So as many of you know, so many of us quickly mobilized to respond and welcome this group of migrants. The administration worked to provide emergency shelter. Nonprofit organizations came together to offer legal services and connect individuals to pro bono attorneys to take their cases in court. They received healthcare services and so many of the important needs that they had upon arrival. But we all know that this group of 48 arrivals are just a small part of a much larger story that's happening here in our state. There's so many new arrivals and new refugees that are coming all the time to Massachusetts from Afghanistan, from Ukraine, now Venezuela, and many others from Haiti, from Brazil, from Central America. We know that through the end of August, that New York and Washington, D.C. received an influx of nearly 9,000 asylum seekers who were bussed in by governors of Florida and Texas. Many of these families then choose to make their way up to Massachusetts. We do want to take a moment to talk about a couple of these other groups of significant arrivals here in our state. One group who has arrived in significant numbers are individuals from Haiti. So Massachusetts is actually has the third largest Haitian community in the United States right now. And so many of those individuals have been coming following the devastating earthquake and the assassination of the Haitian president last year. MIRA is incredibly proud to partner with the Immigrant Family Services Institute, IFC. IFC is a frontline Haitian organization who is currently serving 4,500 Haitians who've arrived in Massachusetts in the last 6 months alone. And as it says on the slide, that is a 200% increase over the fall. And we note that most of these individuals are traveling in family units. And so men, women, and children are all arriving together, seeking protection and a new life here. We also have in Massachusetts a substantial Brazilian community. It is the second most frequent destination for Brazilian arrivals in the United States, second only to Florida. And so many of the individuals from Brazil are coming particularly in response to the persistent economic crisis there. The Brazilian Worker Center, which provides services to many of the new arrivals from Brazil, reports serving 3,400 Brazilian arrivals to Massachusetts since 2021. Again, primarily families. So that just gives you a little bit of the sense of the many different migrants and individuals seeking protection who are arriving here. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to MIRA's political director, Sarang Sekavat, who's going to speak a little bit more about the needs of these individuals. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you everyone for joining us. Obviously, this is an issue that since it first arose 3 weeks ago today actually is when everyone was flown in, has really kind of captured the consciousness of those of us who are concerned about immigration. But I think, as Liz was pointing out, it's not just these folks who arrived at Martha's Vineyard 3 weeks ago that are the concern for us. It's taking care of everybody. It's frankly hundreds of families that are in dire need for support. Give you a few ideas of some of the things that these families are in need of. First off, I should just say, I'm going to forget things. There's no way I could possibly list everything that all of these families are in need of. I will do the best I can, and hopefully not take up too much time while doing it. Certainly the primary need that we've been seeing is simply with housing. So many folks coming in, the system really isn't quite up to the task of really being able to process everyone and match everyone with available housing as quickly as they need it. Emergency housing, we're seeing issues with DHCD about trying to find people emergency housing, and that's been a fairly big issue. We do expect, with regard specifically to those folks on Martha's Vineyard, the latest news is that They should all be assigned housing by the end of the week. So hopefully those 48 folks, and it's actually now down into the 30s somewhere, a number have already left, we'll have housing, and they'll be able to get off that base hopefully by the end of the week. But at the same time, we're getting hundreds of families coming in every month that don't have that. We love the fact that so much of the community and the state and other government resources were marshaled together to be able to provide for these 48 who showed up at Martha's Vineyard, but they're really leaving out a huge chunk of people who also need help. And the fact that we were able to mobilize for these 48 at Martha's Vineyard shows us it's really not that hard. We should be able to do this. In addition to the housing needs, a lot of these folks have legal needs. As Liz mentioned, these are folks who are going through the asylum process. They have presented themselves to Homeland Security. They have made asylum claims and are waiting for those claims to work their way through the immigration court system. A couple problems with that. One, these were all folks who maybe had court appearances anywhere around the country, and yet were brought here to Massachusetts, to an isolated island here in Massachusetts. The other thing is, a lot of these folks, pretty much all of them, had check-ins with ICE that need to be handled, and some of them, could have been as far away as Seattle. So it was really important for these folks in Martha's Vineyard that they got this legal assistance, and we're really happy to report that everyone does have that now who arrived in Martha's Vineyard. But again, we have hundreds of families who don't have that. I don't know if we have anyone from legal service agencies on with us today. Talk to anyone in legal services and they will tell you right now, in fact, they will have told you for years now that they are pretty much at capacity. So we really do need a lot more legal resources available out there. Medical issues have certainly been a major issue that we're seeing. A lot of folks, as they come in from the border, as they get processed by CBP, Customs and Border Protection, will take a lot of their belongings and hold on to them. And that sometimes can include medicines. So we're seeing a lot of people who have chronic conditions who are showing up at hospitals like Boston Medical Center or Mass General, who are looking to replace these medicines that CBP has taken from them. They're not able to get those. They're also just looking for basic, primary care services for families, for children. Problem is that they're going to emergency rooms to try and get this, and emergency rooms aren't set up to be able to do that. So they don't just some need immediate medical attention, some need their, in terms of getting prescriptions, but some also just need sort of that everyday sort of checkups and things like that. And they don't know how to go through the system, and they need assistance going through that system. Another major issue we're seeing was just sort of the basics of everyday. Things like food, clothing, all kinds of issues there that folks need. The last thing that's been a really big issue is with the children that people are coming in with, their families. We have people coming in who don't know how to register their children for school, for example. They need some kind of guidance for that. People who are coming in, women who are coming in pregnant, perhaps giving birth here already, and they don't have anyone who's had children, I haven't, but anyone who's had children know that there's so many little things that you need just on that first day, and folks do not have that. So there's a lot of things, I'm not just talking about things like cribs and such, but as simple as formula, diapers, so many little things that these families need. One of really the main things that I think we really need, though, here in the state is some central place to really kind of be able to coordinate all of this. We've been seeing a lot of folks bust up to New York, and one thing New York has done in response to this is to set up welcome centers for folks so that there's a single point people can go to and say, I'm looking for this, I'm looking for that, and they can get referrals out for these kind of things. Let me tell you, one of the worst things to have happen when you do this kind of work is for someone to come to you for help and you have no idea where to send them. So I think one central spot for folks to go to for the things like their healthcare, including mental health support, by the way, I did not mention that, would be really critical to making sure that all these folks have the best opportunities to succeed when they first get here. Again, I'm sure there are a lot of things I'm missing that folks need, but I'm taking up enough time as it is. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to our legislative director, Amy Grunder, who will talk about the work that we're doing right now.
Thanks, Sarang, and greetings, everyone. Thank you for coming this afternoon, this rainy afternoon. So when we look at all these problems, of course, the next step is to think about advocacy. We are the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition, and we're blessed to have a lot of expertise among our member organizations. It's become clear to advocates both nationally and here in Massachusetts that what we really need is for starters, we need a coordinated federal response to address the needs of incoming asylum seekers that partners with state and local governments, as well as with the providers on the ground. The logical place to start, of course, is at the federal level, because it already has an infrastructure in place to deal with humanitarian emergencies. MIRA supports, for example, the calls of our national partners, like the National Partnership on New Americans, which is calling on the Biden administration to convene and coordinate these efforts in partnership with those who are already doing the work on the state and local level. At a minimum, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, should be funded and mobilized to support ongoing efforts across the country, whereas right now, that support is largely limited to border states. At the state level in Massachusetts, state leaders can begin by requesting FEMA emergency funds to facilitate the creation of shelters, for example, equipped with wraparound services, following the model that we saw at Joint Base Cape Cod with the Martha's Vineyard arrivals. MIRA's state level advocacy is already underway. We've been tracking this issue for a while. Last December, for example, we successfully advocated for $8 million to fund ongoing resettlement work that was being done by the Immigrant Family Assistance Institute, or IFSI, a MIRA member, and a frontline Haitian organization, to provide legal services and direct assistance to secure housing, winter clothing, diapers, other basic needs, anything you can think of. Those funds, however, have already been exhausted. So in response to the ongoing needs of asylum seekers, as well as refugee arrivals from Ukraine and elsewhere, particularly in housing, Governor Baker has proposed an additional $20 million in funding in an upcoming fiscal year 22 supplementary budget. So we'll be asking the state legislature to adopt this funding when it takes it up later on this month. But Martha's Vineyard really put a spotlight on the problem and also on the solution. We saw how effectively the Baker administration mobilized to secure emergency shelter and state services for the Venezuelan migrants, as well as the critical role that was played by legal service providers and community organizations on the ground. But the needs of other migrants deserve the same response, as do the community organizations that are really heroically struggling to provide for them with private funds. With this in mind, last week, MIRA co-hosted a briefing for state legislators together with State Senator Julian Cyr and State Representative Dylan Fernandez. We convened a panel of frontline advocates whose organizations have been providing direct services to these new migrants in order to share what we've been seeing on the ground and really begin thinking collectively with state policymakers about solutions. There was universal agreement at that meeting that Massachusetts must develop a coordinated, ongoing, and equitable state response in collaboration with the nonprofit sector in order to meet the needs of all who arrive here seeking safety and protection, regardless of their country of origin. And here too, a place to start would be to use the existing infrastructure to address the most pressing needs for emergency shelter and housing, and increase the state's capacity to provide midterm housing for, say, a year or a year and 6 months. But the most important feature of any system really will be the coordination at the top and the engagement of providers and community organizations on the ground. We saw some of this during the pandemic, for example, here in Massachusetts. MIRA's membership organizations have the combined expertise and experience to make that happen, and we look forward to partnering with the administration, the state legislature, and the public to do it. That's it for me. Javier, if you want to turn it over for questions.
Thank you so much, Amy and Sarang and Liz, for sort of setting the table on what is happening right now to our supporters, our partners. I do want to just give some really quick shout outs to some of the people joining us. We have a lot of people from Boston Medical Center, which I love, our really good folks, partners from Fragaman, some people from May Wu's office are present, some people from CVS. So I just love the diversity of people that are interested in this topic. So thank you so much for sticking around with us and learning a little bit more about our reaction to what happened in the past 2 weeks. So there are some questions in the chat. So I'm just gonna maybe do some popcorning and just throw it out there. I see some questions that are sort of tied in with what we were chatting about. And then some questions that are more like, there's no answer. I think we're also kind of surprised with what happened. So let's just start with Dina Fisher's question. Could you clarify that they were not designed as refugees? If they were, they would get US benefits of health, etc. Does anyone want to take that on?
I can get us started with that. So it is an excellent question. There are many individuals, of course, who enter the United States with full refugee status. And it's worth taking a moment to talk about the difference between those seeking asylum and those who have refugee status. So ultimately, it's the same definition, it's the same analysis of someone who has fled their country due to some type of past persecution or the fear of future persecution. And what happens is that there is a system internationally where some individuals, largely those in refugee camps or other settings, can be identified and referred to be designated as a refugee. But other individuals, again, who are fleeing often the same circumstances, ultimately find themselves entering a country and asking for asylum protection in that country. And so the real difference between those two groups is where the decision is made, whether the decision is made internationally and then they enter the United States as a refugee, or they can be, again, fleeing the same situation, but come here asking for that asylum protection here in the United States, then that's someone seeking asylum. Once individuals have that status, once they're decided to have full asylum status, they're eligible for some of the same kinds of benefits that refugees receive when they first arrive. But because the refugees arrived with that decision already made, they receive those services at the very beginning of their time in the United States. And so there's a gap for those individuals who come asking for protection while the decision is being made by a judge or the asylum office. There is a gap in what services they're receiving. And so some of the community partners that we mentioned help step up to fill that gap. So hopefully that answers that question. I don't know if Amy or Sarang want to add anything to that.
Thank you, Liz, for answering that. Let's move on to the next question sent by Kate. Could you talk about how you think we or all legislators can ensure that the needs of new arrivals is uplifted and continues to be talked about and addressed, not only in these points of high need?
So I'm happy to take that question. That's something. So one of the ways to do that is by doing exactly what we did do, which was to host a legislative briefing. We had about 70 offices participate in that briefing, but we also need to follow up with folks who were there And I think once we sit down with some of our legislative allies to really think through potential solutions, we can work with them to promote both education among them, in our own communications with them, meetings with legislators, et cetera. We can also give legislators information, ways that they can talk about it with their colleagues and encourage them to speak with their colleagues. And then, sort of on the public end, we'll also be communicating with the public when these opportunities come up for public engagement with their own legislators, which is another way, which is actually a really important way for legislators to become engaged on a particular issues when they're hearing from their own constituents.
Thank you, Amy. And let me just uplift the question that came to the chat directed to you. And it's from Ayla, and it says, Amy, could you repeat the specifics of the supplemental budget ask you mentioned?
So, yeah, so we had in the past supplemental budget, in subsequent budgets, we've had 30 million dedicated by the state for allocated to provide legal services and some direct services to both refugees and immigrants in different buckets, right? And including incoming new arrivals. Right now, the governor has proposed there's often a supplemental budget for the public here. Supplemental budgets to close out fiscal year 22 are often proposed, and we have one that has not yet been taken up by legislators, but we expect that to happen very soon. And the governor has proposed 20 million, and it really kind of highlighted the housing piece, and it's for immigrants and refugees. And right now that funding goes through the Office of Refugees and Immigrants, and it will largely go to the resettlement agencies and also to IFC that we mentioned earlier, the Haitian Frontline Organization. One of the things we might start thinking about is asking for additional funding that's focused specifically on expanding emergency housing for new migrants. We can also think creatively about, I think that's a good place to start, actually, and we can think about, what the needs actually are going forward, because what's been proposed isn't the end all of everything. And we can also think about giving DHCD more capacity to address this issue directly, as opposed to strictly ORI funding.
Thank you, Amy. So I appreciate everybody's questions in the chat and in the Q&A feature. We'll try our best to answer the most that we can with the time given. So let's just continue. We have another question. Maybe Sarang, I think this one could be for you. Is there any evidence why Venezuelans were singled out because of U.S. policy against the government, ?
So I would just say that while we are hearing about a lot of, so obviously the folks who came to Martha's Vineyard, all but 2 of them were Venezuelan. And we are hearing that a lot of the folks who are bussed up to New York City, for example, have been Venezuelan as well. But I would say that while we seem to hear a lot about Venezuelans, they're not the only ones. I actually wouldn't say that they're necessarily being singled out. Martha's Vineyard happened to be largely Venezuelan because they actually had all traveled up here together. And they were still all together when they were approached in San Francisco. So that's why that happened to be, 98% Venezuelan, whatever you want to call it, 95% Venezuelan. But it is, I think we're seeing a lot more Venezuelans just because the situation in Venezuela is so bad. And frankly getting worse, that we're seeing a lot more folks coming up from there. I actually don't think that they're necessarily being singled out politically. In fact, one of the interesting things is that DeSantis is losing on this politically in Florida because there's such a large Venezuelan population down there that is very much against the existing government down in Venezuela. That, the idea that, oh, you're sending these folks who are fleeing the same things we fled, you're kicking them out of your state. It's not working well for DeSantis, actually. So sorry, that's a way of sort of answering the question by not actually answering the question.
No, thank you, Sarang. I'm also seeing in the chat a lot of questions about what resources are available right now. So can you talk about what resources are available in Massachusetts or where we can refer newly arrived migrants to?
Sure. So this is actually part of the problem, is that we really do need sort of a central place to be able to know what resources are available at any given day, or even any given hour, because these resources can sometimes change very quickly. These are things that they've been able to do in New York City and in Chicago, but Boston's a much smaller city. Folks aren't coming to Boston and staying here. They're moving around the state. So this really does need to be, we feel, a state-led effort. Again, I'm answering a question by not answering. I mean, one of the reasons why we are pushing for the 20 million from the state is exactly because some of these resources aren't available right now. And sometimes it just takes time to match folks up with available resources. Like I said, all the folks in Martha's Vineyard have been matched up with housing at this point, but that took 3 weeks. It takes time for these things, unfortunately, and we do believe that a central point would be really key in being able to match folks up with what resources are available for them in their area.
Thank you, Sven. Liz, Amy?
Nope, I think that's good.
Okay, let's continue. There were some questions about how that $20 million was going to be dispersed, but I think you were able to cover that, Amy.
I can add one thing, which is that will take time. That takes time, and also the other piece that is crucial to note about that is that that 20 million is dedicated to the organizations that have been doing that work, the resettlement organizations and the Haitian Frontline Organization. And one of the things we could start thinking creatively about is, are there ways, then those organizations are in contract with ORI, for example, and account for that spending. One thing we might consider is, there are other organizations that are already doing this work with private funds. There might be a way, if we could set up a way for them to apply for grants. I know there's interest in doing that at the federal level. It would be interesting if organizations working at the state level could apply for the same right here in Massachusetts. So that's something else that we're thinking about. Again, all of this stuff is, I think what Martha's Vineyard did is it kind of put a spotlight on these issues, these ongoing issues for all of us, and that includes state policymakers. And I think it's going to take some creative thinking on our parts, all of us collectively together, to come up with policy solutions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Amy. We have a really good question here, and it's around media coverage. It says, what role does the media play in welcoming refugees, uplifting crises, getting leaders to take action, in shaping the narrative?
Liz, would you like to go? Or I can.
Why don't you go ahead and start, Amy?
Yeah, well, the media has a huge role, of course. I think that the media tends to, I think it's no secret, right, that the media follows big stories, right? So when the withdrawal from Afghanistan happened, the media was focused on that. They also tend to follow the stories that are uplifted by the administration, right? Big national stories like that. And the downside of that is some of the simmering issues don't get highlighted. I will say that the Boston Globe did some great work around the issue of Haitian arrivals back in December. And a lot of that, falls to advocates sometimes to bring those stories to the attention of media. But the media is really important because it informs the public sense of what's going on. Every time there's a media story, a big one like this one, I get requests, all of us get requests from the public. How can I help? I have a room for an Afghan refugee, those kinds of things, when in fact, and so again, it sort of guides the public perception of who needs help, when in reality, we need to get away from sort of these discrete, one nation at a time kind of responses. Some people joke it's like the flavor of the month, right? Like, who are we going to be talking about and supporting this month? But really to encourage the media to look at the bigger picture. And I think that's part of what we're trying to do here today.
And perhaps just to add, what we really saw in this response in Martha's Vineyard is that we saw action happen quickly. That was very much collaborations and quick partnerships and work together between elected officials, the administration, nonprofit advocates, local organizations, volunteer attorneys, and so many more individuals who contributed in various ways. And the kind of a public attention that helps generate that level of partnership and coordination makes a real difference, as we saw just a few weeks ago.
Thank you. I'm seeing and reading in the chat a need for a centralized way of resources to share resources, whether that is resources for recently arrived migrants or resources for folks to take action in their own advocacy or through their own organizations. So we're going to put that into our to-do list and see if we can provide something outwards. For right now, after this panel is done, we can provide this recording and also the materials alongside with it. And hopefully we can put something more polished together to be able to use. Let's take maybe one more question. I think that's what we have for time today. And it says, how does MIRA work with homeless advocacy groups? I see the potential conflict between groups supporting migrants and groups fighting for affordable housing.
Can you repeat that question? Is it the concern? What I'm hearing is a concern that somehow the housing needs of migrants will compete with the housing needs of the homeless population. It's no secret that that housing is an issue in Massachusetts and in many, probably, and in cities all across the United States, right? And I think it is really important to include housing advocates in these conversations and not work in silos. I do think that the housing needs of everyone need to be addressed equally. At the same time, I also think that the housing needs of immigrants should also be, it's not a discrete issue. In other words, we need to focus on sort of on a global, holistic response for immigrants, specifically for these new arrivals, like we saw in Martha's Vineyard. You know, that welcome center idea is a great idea that's happening in New York. We can think creatively about ways to do that. And it's really about connecting, as the earlier question pointed out, it's about connecting people with resources, right? But no, there should not be competition for those, I don't think.
Thank you, Amy. And thank you for that really great question. So I think we have done our best to answer most of the questions that have popped up in our Q&A. Any room for final thoughts?
I think the one thing, sorry, I would just say that this is, you know, there's no, well, a couple of things real quick. One, you know, I've seen people talk about this as a crisis. This is really just a crisis for the people who are coming here. They're the ones in crisis. As a state, we're frankly not in crisis. The other thing, I just lost my train of thought. I forgot what else. Oh, that was it. This is not going to be a quick fix. This is something we're going to be working on for a very long time. And we're going to be seeing people coming into the country for a very long time. I've seen a lot of comments about US policies in Venezuela and leading to people coming here. I totally agree with that. And I think it's a big issue. You know, while we work on the aspect of folks who are coming here, have come here, we also need to look at the factors that are pushing folks out of their home countries and why they're leaving and what kind of role we as a nation, A, have played in the past to create those kind of conditions, and B, how do we alleviate that in the future?
But I agree with everything that Sarang has lifted up, but I also want to just end on a note of acknowledging that we saw a truly incredible response to this situation in Martha's Vineyard, and a real sense that we can come together here in Massachusetts to welcome people and to ensure that they receive appropriate services and connections. And it is, I think, a wonderful challenge for us all to work toward, to think of how we can do this for all of the new arrivals and new asylum seekers that we see. And we look forward to working with so many of you and many others who joined us today to make that a reality.
Thank you, Liz. Amy, final thought.
I don't have a final thought. I would just echo what Liz said, that to do anything, it's a truly collaborative effort. And we have so many terrific leaders, both within MIRA's member organizations and outside of MIRA. And we really hope that the state, we're offering our expertise to the state policy officials. We have a lot of great, terrific allies in the legislature and in the administration too. So we look forward to collaborating with everyone together to come up with a truly comprehensive and global solution, so that it's not these sort of one-stop solutions to each new thing that happens.
Thank you, Amy, so much. So with that being said, I appreciate everyone being here today. Thank you, Liz, Amy, and Sarang for providing really good insight and expertise on the matter. Thank you for everybody that was able to join us today. Remember that we will try to package this webinar up in a recording and provide it back out to folks that could not make it today. So again, we will see you at hopefully the next one. Have a good rest of the night.